Hello, hello. Welcome to Haman Nature. I am Adam Haman, and boy, you do not want to miss this episode. As anyone who listens to this show or watches this show knows, Dave Smith went on the Joe Rogan Experience and had a slugfest with Douglas Murray, or at least we thought it was going to be a slugfest. What it ended up being was amazingly interesting and entertaining. And this episode is me and the great Bob Murphy going into this battle in depth. I mean, this is a long one, but we attacked this what was said and what wasn't said from a bunch of interesting angles that I have not seen discussed anywhere else in a very entertaining way. So, if you're interested in this debate, and how could you not be? It was fascinating. Enjoy the Haman Nature take on Dave Smith versus Douglas Murray on Joe Rogan.
Haman Nature, a journey in search of a peaceful and prosperous society with human nature as a guide. Led by your host, Adam Haman.
Hello, Bob.
Hello, Adam.
I don't know if you caught wind of it, but there was a rather famous debate that occurred recently that, as libertarians, I think we're contractually obliged to comment on ad nauseum. Perhaps did you hear of such a thing?
Talking about the Lincoln Douglas debate. That's old.
That is it. Finally, let's post our remarks on it. I like that Douglas guy.
Tom DiLorenzo probably does.
Yeah, I know he does. He wrote 8 books about it. No, we are talking about Dave Smith's appearance on the Joe Rogan Experience with Douglas Murray. And I can't speak on the subject since I have never traveled to Austin and been inside of Joe Rogan's studio. Have you, Bob?
I've been to Austin several times, but I've never been inside Rogan's studio.
Not sure if it counts. Let's just go ahead and record anyway, and maybe someone in a posh British accent will call us up and tell them how completely irrelevant and obnoxious our opinions are.
So I suppose we should maybe, if you don't disagree, give just our general reactions, and then we'll go ahead and dive into the clips.
I think we should.
Okay, folks. And as always, folks, let me say we are going to, obviously, we've been looking at the reaction as well, and so we're going to try to do meta stuff and comment on the commenting too, when appropriate. So my big picture, and Dave himself said this, is a lot of people that were fans of, oh yeah, Dave crushed him. In contrast to other debates where Dave has, I thought, wiped the floor with people. In this one, I really think it's correct to say Dave didn't win. I think Douglas Murray lost.
Agreed.
And I said this on Twitter, and I will say it again here. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I use that phrase. I was so looking forward to this debate, partly because I'm very familiar. I'm a big fan of Dave. I listen to his stuff. I know, his 8 top talking points when it comes to Israel, Palestine, and what's going on in Gaza. And I've listened to a bunch of his debates with other people on this stuff, and the only real pushback I ever hear is, well, any baby that dies and since October 7th, that's the fault of Hamas, or Hamas. And so that's all I've ever heard, which to me is like, okay, I mean, I get that. I don't think anybody who supports the IDF is necessarily a monster. I understand where you're coming from and collateral damage and the distinction between deliberately killing civilians versus an unfortunate, regrettable necessity. But that's the only thing. I haven't heard anybody criticize, Dave's other points like, hey, Israel was supporting Hamas and, all that stuff. So I was really looking forward to this. I was okay, if anybody is going to really just say, if Dave's been just saying something that's wrong or that's wildly out of context or whatever, this is going to be it. And so when right out of the gate, Murray just decides to pick a fight with Rogan, the joke I made was to say that was like when I was younger and I got the pay-per-view box and I had my friends come over and got pizza and wings to watch the Tyson Holyfield fight, and it was over because he bit his ear. And I was just like, what are you doing? You just ruined my party. So that was kind of my reaction to this, is I was upset. And I guess, one thing I'll say here is, the irony, at first I was just stunned. And I thought, why is Douglas Murray doing this? I mean, if what you wanted to do, if you were alarmed at how so much of the world was falling for the, Hamas talking points or propaganda and didn't understand the noble self-defense in which the Israelis were engaged, I would think you would take the opportunity on the world's biggest podcast to really make a decisive case and get people to, set them straight. And like what he was doing, if anything, that would just give ammunition and confirm for those people that, oh yeah, they got nothing. The pro-Israeli people have nothing but rhetorical tricks and whatnot. And I was really, and then I realized later what it was. Like, no, he wasn't there to change it. He was there to sell books. It was like when, do you remember when Jordan Peterson like got himself kicked off Twitter because he picked on what's her name, Elliot Page, and he said like whoever did this to her should be arrested or something, and it just kept escalating. He got kicked up, and then it was like the next day he announced he had joined the Daily Wire. I was like, oh, that's kind of coincidence. So I'm saying here, I realized ex post, no, the whole point of this was Douglas Murray went on knowing I'm gonna pick a fight, I'm gonna tell off Rogan to his face and whatever, and then boom, my supporters are gonna be behind me. And I'm going to sell that many more books, which is ironic since, his whole thing was, how dare you people just, cater to the controversy for clicks when we serious journalists. So anyway.
No, I think that's a really interesting theory. I'm not sure I buy it. Well, here, let me tell you the few things I thought.
Okay.
I was also disappointed. I didn't think Douglas Murray showed up with any kind of strength in arguments. And I've been sort of a fan of his over the last few years because he's been a very powerful rhetorical voice against the woke mob and the excesses of the left, the assault on free speech, a little ironically after this debate. And I just, it didn't really occur to me until this debate that I had to remind myself, oh yeah, Douglas Murray's a neocon. In 2006, he wrote a book, Neoconservatism, Why We Need It, in which he proudly says he is one. And then I remembered, because I wasn't cognizant of it at the time, but yeah, he supported all the wars in the Middle East since 9/11. And that's just what he is a mouthpiece for the regime when it comes to war. He's in favor of all of them. And I think that's why he didn't really have, well, we'll get into some of the details, but I mean, obviously he came to promote a book, but I don't think he was trying to make a bad debate showing in order to sell copies. I think he did poorly because, much like Bill Kristol versus Scott Horton, I just don't think he had very much. I think he has the regime talking point and the really comic book version of the morality play, who's good, who's evil. And there's nothing else in there that he could have flouted, all of the many, many points and historical occurrences that Dave was throwing at him. I think most of the things Dave threw at him, Murray had never heard before.
Okay. I mean, I'm in agreement with everything you just said. Let me just clarify what I meant. I'm not saying he went in there thinking the best way to get book sales is for me to make an ass of myself. No, what I'm saying is, like, you're going on Joe Rogan's podcast. Ostensibly, you really care about the security of Israel. And you can't understand why there are so many people who are sympathetic to Hamas, right? And so the last thing in the world it would seem to me that you would do is start insulting the host of the show. Like, what more could you do to turn off the audience immediately and ensure that they're going to now be skeptical of what you're saying? So that's what I meant. You see what I'm saying? So I'm not. So my point is, no, I think he knew the way to really get things going is to pick a fight with Rogan and to,
maybe
and to make it a spectacle. That's what I'm trying to say.
I thought that was organic too. I mean, I think considers himself part of the old guard where there were gatekeepers to information and opinion being presented to the public. I think he's genuinely furious that people are listening to Joe Rogan and the people who Joe has on rather than him. Mm-hmm. I think he's genuinely upset that the tide has turned.
Let me just also say this is good. We're having a debate right now. I love it. You're right, because I was a big fan. That was another reason I was just stunned, and I feel a bit sheepish. Months ago, when it was like first floated that Dave might, people were saying, "Hey, Dave, you should debate Douglas Murray," and I don't remember, but there was some reason months ago where that seemed like it might be a possibility. Because I remember I sent a note or I posted on Twitter. I don't remember. Telling Dave, hey, these other guys have been chumps, but watch out if you go up against Douglas Murray because he's sharp. And because I had seen him in the Monk debate, for example, and I just said, oh wow, he's really good. And so when I saw this performance, I was like, what the? But you know what's funny though, Adam, is I went back and rewatched it because some people were posting. I was like, yeah, I liked him so much in the Monk debate when he was standing up to Malcolm Gladwell. And I remember that too. And I was like, yeah, I loved him back. What the heck? I guess it's just if I agree. And I went and rewatched it. He was a stick, but with a PR in the front back then too. And I think what happened is, like, even in the classic thing where Malcolm in their closing arguments of that Monk debate, where folks, it was him and the who's the guy that would write for like Rolling Stone? Shoot, do you remember who I'm talking about? Adam? Yes, Matt Taibbi and Douglas Murray were like against the corporate establishment media or something, biasing them. I forget the exact resolution. It was Malcolm Gladwell and some woman who were like defending, the integrity of good old fashioned journalism and not just getting polarized and just having people do their talking points to their, on their soapboxes. And so that was the debate. In the closing arguments, Gladwell was saying, oh, and our opponents here, they want to go back to the 1950s. And so he was trying to make it look like because they were yearning for when people respected Walter Cronkite, that they also like segregated drinking fountains, right? So that was kind of the subtle thing that Malcolm Gladwell was doing throughout. And so I don't understand why that was bothering them.
Yeah, that's why I didn't mind Murray being a jerk, because I thought Matt, he drew first blood. But Malcolm Gladwell then said, and so Matt and Doug and Murray's like, Douglas, like, wow, you know what I mean? I realized, like, that's pretty petty to be objecting to someone calling you Doug. You know what I mean? And then when it was Murray's turn to talk, he goes, well, Malk, like instead of Malcolm, and the audience laughed or whatever. And so again, like, I'm just really like, that's incredibly petty and a stupid, but at the time I liked it because I was like, yeah, you're standing up to the bully. And so, but anyway, so I'm just, my point is, it's actually not so much that Murray was an awesome guy who used purely reasonable arguments and stuff before. It's just I liked his conclusion. Is that no, he was a brawler kicking people, in the crotch back then. It was just they had kicked him in the crotch first, so I thought it was cool. Yeah, there's two really interesting things about the psychology of the viewer or listener there. One is, as you said, it really matters whether you're on their side to begin with, how you are going to evaluate their tactics and, how they did. And another thing, as we were chatting about before we recorded, Glenn Greenwald had a funny take on this where he just remarks that for the American public, just hearing that British accent makes you give him a 20 IQ point advantage just in the back of your mind, in the same way as most Northerners, if they hear that Southern drawl, just assume a 20 IQ point reversal the other direction. Right. And it's really funny the way we listen and the way we view.
What I just have two other quick ones here. My takeaway from this was, it's really amazing. It was almost that Dave is too nice. Like, in other words, people were saying things, and Glenn Greenwald did too in the clip you're talking about, Adam, where he was saying, yeah, there was a period months ago where, I don't know if it was months, but in the past, it might have been more than months, where Douglas Murray was talking to our people and was going to come on, meaning he was going to like be on a panel or just one-on-one with Glenn Greenwald on this stuff. And then he said, and then he just ghosted us. Yeah. And if you've seen Greenwald on panels, like, he can be vicious. Like,
yes, he can.
Just not like, hurting women and children kind of thing, but I mean, just like going right and not being afraid to make an awkward scene. Whereas you can see in this Rogan thing, Dave several times, like, he was being conciliatory. That, whenever he had the chance, he said, "Oh, and I'm agreeing with you calling it a death cult."
He was trying to find common ground,
and you were so good on the anti-woke left stuff, and you know what I mean. And so it was ironic, given the caricature people have of Dave, that I think partly why Douglas Murray was like, "Okay, Rogan, yeah, you want to have this guy on too? Bring him on," is because he knew Dave actually wasn't going to be a complete stick the way Murray wasn't afraid to be.
Yeah, I mean, to underscore your point. I saw Glenn Greenwald on Bill Maher's show, and he just tore into him and made him look stupid, and he's never been back on that show since.
Right.
And I was talking about the debate with two people I know closely who didn't know Douglas Murray, like literally didn't know who he was, or never read a book or seen an interview, and they were appalled by what a stupid jerk he came off as.
Yeah.
And that's another point in Dave's brilliance. I mean, maybe he only did it because Joe's his friend, and Joe said, I don't want this thing to be obnoxious and go off the rails. But a lot of people are going to see this that maybe who have tuned in just to watch Douglas Murray kick some comedian around who have never seen Dave before. And if that's the case, he's going to come off looking really good to them.
Yep.
I mean, his aura is just going to be boosted tremendously from this because he didn't respond to Douglas Murray being a jerk by being a jerk in response.
Right. Real quick, I know we got to get in the clips here. What it reminded me of, I don't know if you happen to see, but there's a period where I would watch those celebrity roasts that I think was a Comedy Central. I forget who would have them.
Yeah.
And there was one time at least where they had Ann Coulter was one of the participants. And so clearly, the network or whoever makes those decisions just thought having her on. I think she probably had a book that was coming out, and so that's why she wanted to do it, was just to get her name out there and everything. But it was clear the other, the regulars, the people that would typically do those roasts, they didn't want her being there. Like, they were disgusted that I can't believe she's here, I guess because the network wants to get the rating.
I remember that, yeah.
And I saw, it was interesting. They were not going to let her be their colleague, right? So in other words, when it was her turn when she was up there, roasting people, and she would say the line, and then the camera would show the recipient of her zinger, and they were doing stuff like going, "Good one," and it was like, yeah, she didn't say the funniest line of the night, but it wasn't bad, and but they were just letting her know, you are not a comedian, you're not one of us. Like, no, you shouldn't be here. And I'm saying that was the vibe I got from this, is that Murray was not actually listening to anything coming out of Dave's mouth. It was just, you shouldn't be here. How dare you think you should be sitting across? I can't believe I got to sit here and listen to you make arguments. You know what I mean? And it was just like the scorn and contempt. Like,
I think you're exactly right. The whole time it seemed to me, Douglas was saying, quit talking about history and politics. You're not an expert. And came right out of the gate mad at Joe, saying, and you quit platforming these people. They're not experts. What are you doing? And then Dave would say, I got a right to my opinion. What are you saying? I can't talk. And then Douglas would realize what he'd just done and said, oh, no, you have a right to talk. And Dave, of course, agrees, he's not an expert too. So it's really weird. People like Douglas Murray, and I've seen, Sam Harris was doing the exact same thing on some weird rant he did. And they're doing this weird thing where first they smear you and insist that you're not an expert. And it's like, who cares? Yeah, you admit I'm not an expert. And then they go, see, he's hiding behind that thing. I'm not an expert.
Right.
It's like, what are you talking about? I didn't bring up the expert class. You did.
Right.
You smear me with the thing, and then you try and say I'm using it as a dodge. It's insane.
Yeah. I mean, I know we might play that clip later, but while we're just saying this, I don't want to forget. This is, and I saw this developing on Twitter, X. This is morphing into like the very fine people. Like it's just like that, where yes, Trump did say those words, but it's the exact opposite of what everyone's attributing to him. And the same thing here. I can't tell you how many people I have seen state matter-of-factly, yeah, Dave throws out all these strong opinions about Gaza, but then when challenged, retreats to, hey, I'm just a comedian, I'm just asking questions. And say, Dave, in the hundreds of hours I've listened to him over the years, I've never heard him make that claim once.
Neither one of those two claims.
To try to prove
he's never said, I'm not an expert. He's also never said, I'm just asking questions. That was a joke from South Park, for crying out loud, making fun of Glenn Beck or something.
Yeah, and so, and then I heard, David, his reaction with Robbie the Fire, on Part of the Problem, said he thinks he did say that like 15 years ago when he called into Sam Cedar's show, and that, he said some point, and then Cedar, corrected him. I don't know what it was. And he said, I may have said something along the lines of, well, dude, I'm just a comedian. What do I know? So I appreciate Dave being honest and saying, yeah, if I go back, I think he said 12 to 15 years. I didn't look it up. I think I did say that. But the point being, he's not at all doing. In fact, he was there on the biggest show in the world, or podcast, for 3 hours to say to Douglas Murray, rip me apart. Here, crush me in front, like humiliate me. And Murray kept dodging and bobbing and weaving and not addressing his arguments and using complete straw men and ridiculous rhetorical ploys. So I'm saying it was just Orwellian for Murray to say, and this guy's here, and he won't even, when challenged, he'll just say, I'm a comedian. And then Dave, out of humility, said, I'm not claiming to be an expert, but his point is, I'll sit here and let you spank me if there's something. So that's what I'm just saying. It was not just like, oh, that was an unfair elitist card. It was like Orwellian, the move Murray was trying to, and yet I saw dozens upon dozens of people saying that's what just happened and like retweeting Dave and being like, look at this guy. He just hides behind his comedian status and he won't debate. Or it's like, what? What are you talking about? Okay.
Yeah, there was that. Yeah, well, it's going to get worse. We're about to play some clips. But yeah,
okay.
the only card it seemed like he had was the "you're not an expert" and also "you're vaguely racist." And I'm not going to say it outright, but you are. So let's start with one of the biggest things that came out, where Douglas Murray had this to say about what gives you the right to have a strong opinion on the matter. You ready?
Mm-hmm.
No deficit of goods coming in. I've been plenty of
There was
times.
no deficit?
No, there are
No
plenty
goods were kept out.
There are plenty. How many? Have you been to the crossing points?
No.
When were you last there at all?
I've never been.
You've never been.
Well, am I not allowed to talk about it now? Have you ever been to Nazi Germany? Are you allowed to have feelings about them?
You can't time travel, but you
Well,
can.
right.
But you can travel.
Okay, but so what? So what's the point? Like,
No,
okay.
I find that
Lots
very...
of people have been there and agree with me, and lots of people have been there and agree with you.
Yeah, but
so
if
I don't
you're
know
going
what
to spend a year and a half talking about a place, you should at least do the courtesy of visiting it.
All right. I just think this is a non-argument.
You don't
but
think?
Okay. No, I think it's a non-argument.
But if you're an expert,
Well, you have to go and touch the ground.
No, I think you have to see. I think it's a good idea to see stuff, particularly if you spend a career talking about something. Yes, I have a journalistic rule of trying never to talk about a country, even in passing, unless I've at least been there.
So there you have it.
That's pretty strong stuff.
It's pretty strong stuff. He has an opinion. He's not afraid to tell you about it. Should we differ? I mean, that was what they were talking about, I think, was whether the blockade in Gaza was brutal or not. And then Douglas was just shocked to see that Dave has all these opinions, but never even went there. I mean, he has no lived experience to inform his opinion. Isn't that strange? Should we maybe play another clip?
Sure, why not? Wonder where you're going with this.
Who could tell?
An argument they say is you, Douglas Murray, and you, Lex Friedman, don't have the right to talk about race and racism in America. It is our struggle. You are from a privileged class of people that don't know what it's like to be a black man or woman in America walking down the street. Can you steel man that case?
First of all, that.
That's not. I think we need to define steel manning.
Okay.
Can you?
I know what steel
try
manning is. I really resent that form of argumentation.
Sure.
I really resent it. I have the right to talk about whatever the hell I want, and no one's going to stop me or try to intimidate me, or tell me that I can't simply because of my skin color. And I think that if I said to somebody else the other way around, it would be equally reprehensible. If I said, shut up, you have no right to criticize anything that Douglas Murray says because you've not got my skin color. Okay. It's not an exact comparison, but seriously, is that a reasonable form of argument? You haven't been through everything I've been through in my life, therefore you can't comment. No. In that case, nobody can talk about anything. We might as well pack up, go home, and isolate ourselves.
Strong words, but can you try to steel man the case? Not in this particular situation, but there's people that have lived through something that can comment in a very specific way. Like, for example, Holocaust survivors.
Yes.
There is a sense in which maybe a basic sense of civility when a Holocaust survivor is speaking about their experience of the Holocaust than an intellectual from a very different part of the world that's simply writing about nuanced geopolitics of World War II just should not interrupt the Holocaust survivor.
We physically interrupt them if they're telling their
with
story.
Words, with logic and reason, that the experience of the Holocaust survivor somehow fundamentally has a deeper understanding of the humanity and the injustice of the...
Well, first of all, again, we're in even deeper waters now, but in terms of wanting to listen to another person who has experienced something, yes. But not endlessly. Not endlessly. I mean, there are some people who've written about there are people who've written about the Holocaust who didn't experience the Holocaust and have written about it better than people who did. It's not this idea that the lived experience, to use this terrible modern jargon, as if there's another type. This idea that the lived experience has to triumph over everything else is not always correct. It can be correct in some circumstances. if you were sitting in a room with a Holocaust survivor and somebody who'd never heard about the Holocaust and wanted to kind of, shoot out their views on it, yeah, one of those people should be heard more than the other, obviously. If there's somebody who's experienced racism firsthand and there's somebody else who has never experienced it, then obviously you'd want to hear from the person who has experienced it firsthand, if that is the discussion underway. I don't think that it's the case that is endlessly the case. I'm also highly reluctant to concede that there are groups of people who, by dint of their skin color or anything else, get to dominate the microphone. Now, of course, we're literally both speaking into microphones at the moment, so there's an irony to this, but let's skate over the irony. What I mean is people saying, you don't have the right to speak. I have the right to take the microphone from you and speak because I know best. Fine. If you know best, we'll argue it out and someone will win.
Okay, so folks,
we'll argue
you may
it out and someone will win. What a novel approach to arguing about things.
And by the way, that was Tyler Janke, Janke. I think he was the first person to locate that, because a lot of you folks, especially if this is your thing and you've been watching this stuff with bated breath, you probably saw someone grab that and interposed and did a Douglas Murray versus Douglas Murray thing, like weaving in clips of him dressing down Dave. You've never even been there? The least you could do is pay the common courtesy of visiting the region. And so making it look like he was yelling at himself. And it was pretty good, especially when he ended with just a certain irony here. Like that was just, pièce de résistance. But my concern was, the reason I asked Adam to play just the raw, original interview with Lex Friedman, was I wanted to show we weren't taking it out of context, right? Because I even saw some fans of Dave, when that Murray versus Murray clip went viral, were saying, I wonder if this is edited, like, is this really fair? So anyway, I wanted people to see the full context. And again, I think patient zero on this was Tyler Janke, who, found the original thing and then someone else grabbed it and, made it into the thing that went viral. So I want to say, because Murray's fans, of course, as people might predict, said, this isn't a gotcha. What are you talking about? He was saying he's allowed to write about racism even though he's not black, or he can write about sexism even though he's not a woman. Whereas he was saying today, okay, but that's why the thing when then amazingly Lex brings up the Holocaust and someone writing about the Holocaust, and no. And the thing is too, the last thing I'll say here, Adam, I don't want to be hogging this, is it's not so much his particular views in both, it's just the moral indignation and outrage he mustered in both cases when it was like 100 and not 180 degrees, but maybe 172 degrees difference in the vector of his opinions in both cases that coincidentally lined up to justify whatever he wanted to do at the moment, right? So when he wants to write about black people and their suffering, he's allowed to do that. How dare you shut up and, F off. I'm going to do whatever I want. But when Dave wants to cite statistics from the World Bank about what happened to Gazan domestic output when they had a blockade, no, Dave can't say, no, unless you've been there and actually looked at the blockade, you can't cite some report from the World Bank. What do they know?
Yeah, I'm fairly certain that Douglas Murray, back when he was in high school or the equivalent in Britain and in debate club, I think he was one of those people that could take either side of any argument and come at it with just as much moral outrage. And how dare you be arguing on the other side, just depending on which side he was taking and the fact that he wanted to win.
Yeah.
And we've got another clip that's...
Well, hang on. Before, can I do my version of the multimedia? Can I just show two things quickly here? Of course. So we're going to do still images. Folks, we're just doing everything. We're talking at you. We're showing video. I'm going to show still images. All right. So this is a snapshot of an article from the Jerusalem Post on April 11th, 2024. It says, Israel honors British journalist Douglas Murray for support post-October 7th. Okay, so, folks, when he says he's visited, he was taken on guided tours by the IDF. Okay, he was doing, photo ops that the Israeli military set him up with. Okay, so this is not speaking truth to power. This is not a man on the street going around and just digging up what they don't want you to know. Okay, so the fact that he's with confidence and authority telling people all about this is how it is over there because I've seen it with my own eyes. That by itself rings hollow to me. And then also, let me now show. Can you see this?
Yes.
Okay. So this is full disclosure. This is from UNICEF. So I know, given that I'm a libertarian, I'm not allowed to ever cite anything except Murray
How
Rothbard's
convenient,
writings.
Bob.
Yeah.
When it suits your purposes, UNICEF is a wonderful organization.
You don't trust Chuck Schumer, but you do trust UNICEF? I find that highly dubious. So anyway, this is from a UNICEF report on the blockade of Gaza, and they use the term blockade. And so this top left one, that's saying truckloads entering through Kerem Shalom and Rafah, monthly averages. And you can see the first half of 2007, there were 11.2 thousand truckloads entering. And then the second half of 2007, when the blockade, was put in place, it dropped to 2.6 thousand. Okay, and then you can see how low it was for the next several years. This right one is truckloads exiting through those two choke points. And you can see 2007, the first half, it was 961. And then the second half, it was 17. And the next year total, it was 3. And then the next year was 2. Okay, and then did it, and then started going up. And then in terms of the people, right? So this bottom left quadrant, exits and entries of people through Rafah. Monthly averages, you can see 2006, it was 25.8 thousand. 2007, the first half was 15.7 thousand. 2007, the second half, it was 0.4 thousand. 2008, it was 1.8K, and so on. All right, and then lastly, the bottom right, exit of people through ERES, monthly averages. You can see back in the year 2000, it was more than 500,000. And then 2006, it was 31.5 thousand. And then you can see in the second half of 2007, it had dropped to like 1.9K and so on. All right. So you look at this picture, and we didn't play the full thing for you folks just in the interest of brevity because we had a lot of clips to play for you. But I mean, Murray went on at length challenging the very notion that there was a blockade at all, and just saying Dave was nuts for saying that he was a dupe, a useful idiot that had fallen for the propaganda from the World Bank and other organizations. Or he had then suggested at one point that Dave just went to Wikipedia, right? When Dave was like, well, no, it was the World Bank, but okay. Right. And so I'm saying, yeah, maybe UNICEF just made up all those bar charts, but for Douglas Murray to know that, it's not enough that he just went and saw the checkpoints. He would have had to have gone in like 2006 and done a survey, and watched it over a period of time to get some idea of, okay, extrapolating, I think probably the number, per month, and then come back in 2007 and then come back in 2008 and done like, that's kind of how you would need to, it's the fact that he went and looked at it at a certain point. So, I mean, in those numbers too, they were showing it wasn't that it was literally sealed and nothing was coming or going. It was just that the flow of trucks in and out and people in and out was greatly constricted. And so again, Murray would have you believe that although they were just stopping and looking for rocket launchers and, refined uranium. And other than that, they were waving it through. No, that's obviously not what happened. And you can say their motive was purely self-defense, but the point is, and that's what Dave was trying to say, the claim from the critics is that, yeah, maybe the Israelis ostensibly are just trying to make sure they can stop rocket attacks, which, I get that. But the point is they were erring on the side of anything that could possibly have a dual use and be used. That's what the UNICEF article was saying. It was like things that could be used for building construction that was blocked because, you could use this, to help in your military or war effort. And so now, we can't build a house. So anyway, I'm just showing those statistics. Again, maybe those are completely made up because they're all people that hate Israel, but you can see just saying, oh no, I went there and I saw those checkpoints with my own eyes doesn't really mean much.
Yeah, I'm glad you showed that, just to defend Dave a little bit, but I'm even more glad that you showed that Jerusalem Times front page article, because every time Douglas Murray was saying you never didn't even go there, then you don't know what you're talking about. I kept thinking about George Bernard Shaw going into the Soviet Union and being taken on a Potemkin village tour about how great the Soviet Union is and coming away with this incredibly distorted, intentionally vision of what that place is. And so you can come back to the West and parrot a bunch of idiocy. But he was on the ground. I mean, he did take the time to visit. Or Pulitzer Prize winning Walter Duranty, I think his name was, who he spent years there in Moscow. So who's going to know what's going on in the Soviet Union better than the guy and who Douglas Murray is? He's a avowed propagandist neocon who favors wars. He's going to have an opinion about who is on the right side and on the wrong side on these wars. And so what are his boots on the ground experiences going to be like? They're going to be the propaganda tour of the government that he's championing. I mean, it's almost like you would be his methodology of finding truth is going to be worse than a guy who reads a bunch of books.
Right.
Because at least, depending on the book you read, what propaganda is and what it isn't. But if you go there and just get shown that, that factory that doesn't actually exist and all those hungry people that, are actors going back to the Soviet.
I knew you were going to say that, and I went to double check too to make sure, in case you didn't say the guy's name, that I didn't screw up, and to confirm it was Walter Duranty. But I realized I checked Wikipedia, so for all we know, it's not actually Walter Duranty. That could be the wrong name, but I didn't actually go talk to the guy's descendants. And again, just to underscore, I don't know that we had that on our list of things, but at one point in this, Dave uses the term neoconservative. And Murray says, "Oh, the N-word," and it's hilarious because Dave looks at Rogan. He's like, "Did I say that?" Like, it doesn't look like he's hamming up. It looks like Dave really is alarmed for a moment. Like, "Holy cow, did that slip out?" But meaning that, and then it's odd that someone would bristle at someone using the term neoconservative when he has a book titled "Neoconservative: Why We Need It More Than Ever" or something like that. It's just amazing.
Did you see shortly after the interview dropped, the Joe Rogan Experience episode? Somebody called Douglas Murray a neocon, and James Lindsay immediately piped up going, "How stupid can you be to think Douglas Murray is a neocon?"
Yeah.
Then immediately, of course, 15 images of the cover of this book this man wrote. Neoconservatism.
Did you see what James Lindsay's response to that was?
No.
He said, "That was 2006. Calm down."
Oh, holy!
Just
completely
astonishing.
Different
guy. Yeah, I understand now, like, why James Lindsay. And by the way, like, to get what was going on with Murray, because again, I told you I was like stunned at first, and then when I realized, and James Lindsay was tweeting out and saying, "Yeah, guys, he wasn't like responding to Dave saying he didn't even debate me." And he goes, "You're right, he wasn't there to debate you. He was there to promote his book, and he was annoyed that he had to sit there and listen to you." And so I was like, and I realized, yeah, that's good. The one person who is as smug and out of touch and delusional and a stick is Douglas Murray is James Lindsay, so it is good that thank you. Now I've seen.
Hey, Sam Harris is in this fight. Don't act like he's not in this. I'll go handing the baton automatically.
Okay, you're okay. Due respect. I still think I would give it to James, but you're right. I shouldn't have said that so confidently. My apologies.
All right, let's move on to another clip because the clock is a ticking. This is the one where they're arguing about what is and what isn't a concentration camp.
First of all, let's just get one term correct, because you said you do think it's a concentration camp.
I said it shares many,
Right. And you also say that there's a disproportionately heavy youth population in Gaza.
Yes. Do you think that's not accurate?
I think the second one is accurate.
Right.
But it's a very strange thing to say that there's a population boom in a concentration camp. In Auschwitz in the 1940s, there was not a doubling of the population.
Yeah, well, I didn't say it was.
He didn't say it was a
death
concentration camp. He said it shares many of the characteristics.
Auschwitz was a concentration camp.
It was ultimately a death camp. No.
Yes, it started as a concentration camp.
Yes, correct.
You'll notice that people were not doubling in size their number because of the children they could have in Auschwitz.
Yeah.
So that was a weird argument.
It's weird. It's weird, right? It's weird.
It's a weird move you're doing, Smith.
So, I mean, do you want to say anything to that? Because I have some things to say.
Let her rip, Bob.
Okay. In World War II, from early 1942 to 1946, 120,000 Japanese Americans were placed inside some type of thing.
A thing, yes.
Yeah. I don't know. Maybe it'll
an
start with the letter
unnamed
C.
Thing.
And according, full disclosure, my source here is Wikipedia. I get it.
Doesn't it start with an F? It was a freedom camp, right?
Yeah. According to Wikipedia, the hospitals and the camps during this 4-year stretch recorded that there were 1,862 deaths and 5,981 births
in a freedom camp.
Well, that fits. Yeah. So clearly it must have been a freedom camp, right? So there's that. It's funny too that the U.S. government was so browbeaten with the freedom camps, they ended up paying reparations and stuff when clearly. Now, I didn't go and talk to George Takei, which I should have done to know if this is true. But anyway,
what does he know about reproduction?
Yeah, people were having, well, he actually wouldn't know about having babies, but okay. Oh my.
You see what I did there?
We're both talking over each other because we're so excited to get our zingers out. I got another one for you. In 1808, the U.S. banned the importation of slaves. And so if you think about it, the lifespan, that's why slavery basically just kind of withered away, because if you can't bring in new slaves to the southern plantation economy, the slave population would just keep going down year after year as they kept dying off, right? Is that what happened?
That was not what happened, Bob.
Were you saying they weren't enslaved?
Somehow managed to
it's got to be either, Adam, I think it's got to be either the black Americans in the southern, plantations were either slaves or they were allowed to reproduce. It can't be both. So which one was it?
You heard Douglas Murray's accent. You're going to say he knows more about logic than you?
Yes. I got one more. I'm curious if you know this, Adam. Are you familiar with, as we enter this Passover season, do you know why it is, Adam? I'm not saying this to be facetious. I actually am asking you, I don't know how much common knowledge, that Moses was raised in the Pharaoh's court. And that's partly why, and God in his sovereignty, engineered it that the leader of his people would also know the ways of royal intrigue. Do you know how that came to be?
He was adopted, found in the river in a little reed basket by some...
Why would... I guess his mom was just kind of lackadaisical and was out playing bridge with her friends and let the baby just drift down the river. Is that what happened?
Crack addict was in my version of the Bible.
Okay, folks, in the interest of brevity, I'll stop here. Exodus chapter 1, let me just jump ahead to verse 8. Now there arose a new king over Egypt who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, "Look, the people of the children of Israel are more and mightier than we. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and it happen in the event of war, that they also join our enemies and fight against us, and so go up out of the land." Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with their burdens, and they built for Pharaoh supply cities, Pithom and Ramses. But the more they afflicted them, the more they multiplied and grew, and they were in dread of the children of Israel. So the Egyptians made the children of Israel serve with rigor, and they made their lives bitter with bondage. Okay, and so the point is, the children of Israel, their population's growing at a fast clip, such that Pharaoh is alarmed. If this continues, they're going to overthrow us. And so at some point, he gives the order that all the male children, he says to the midwives, all the male children you got to kill. And so when Moses is born, the mom doesn't want him, and so they put him in a basket, and then Pharaoh's daughter sees him, and that's how. Okay, so again,
this is.
I guess Douglas Murray is telling
it's just
Jewish
more
people
evidence
in
that,
Passover that no, you guys weren't enslaved. What are you talking? Moses didn't deliver you out of slavery. What are you talking about?
It's more evidence that the Bible just is not historically accurate. You did have an enslaved population, and the Bible is saying they were multiplying such that Pharaoh was afraid.
I guess the wild card would be it was divine intervention. Really, that's the only way people who are subjugated could possibly grow in number.
Yeah, right? In all seriousness, again, I've been a fan of Douglas Murray when he's championing causes I support. And I thought he was a smart guy. Mm-hmm. I could not believe the dumb argument he made. That was just so stupid.
But you're right. It's the British accent plus the utter confidence with which he says it. You're kind of just knocked back on your heel. I think he could probably beat me and convince me that, or not convince me, but if I debated him on, is the Federal Reserve better than a free market economy, he'd probably win. He'd probably just, have you ever been to the central bank? Well, no, but I looked at the statistics of them too. You can't even be bothered.
Yeah, if it was Oxford style, you'd be in a lot of trouble. So would I. It was appalling. I thought it was a terrible argument, and he made more. Do you want to just barrel through?
Let's do it. Let's do it.
All right. This was. Well, let's just play and then we'll talk. I have to break this clip up into two segments because it's all great, but it's just too long.
Yep.
But here we go.
things that everybody else does and act like our policies have no impact on this.
Be ridiculous.
So very specifically, with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and I'll just get two bullet points on this, and we could talk about a lot of this. But look, number one, in 2008, as you well know, right, the Joe Biden CIA director, who was the CIA director for the entire war up until Donald Trump just came back in, he wrote the Niet means Niet memo to Condoleezza Rice, a private cable to the then Secretary of State when he was ambassador to Russia, to let her know that this flirting with bringing Ukraine into NATO is gonna end up in a war. And by the way, the Russians don't want to do it. His words exactly. If you keep pushing with this, the Russians are going to have to make a decision that they don't want to make, which is whether they intervene or not. And number two, Stoltenberg, I might be butchering that again, but the head of NATO, he himself said that Vladimir Putin sent him a draft treaty in late 2021 and said, look, if you just put into writing that you will not bring Ukraine into NATO, I won't invade. Now, if you want to argue that
I admire your appeal to authority to the head of the CIA.
It's not an appeal to authority.
Well,
how is that an appeal to authority?
You regard the view of the CIA director on that occasion as being useful for your argument. But secondly, secondly, there's an oddity to believing what Vladimir Putin says.
No, wait, hold on, but you didn't let.
All right, I'm going to play the second half of this in just a minute, but let's just put a thumbnail on where we are here. Dave says, he brings up the Niet means Niet memo, documenting the very serious nature that the Russians take about Ukraine entering NATO, and he brings up this sample treaty that Putin offered to NATO. If he would just please say, put it in writing, we'll never put Ukraine into NATO. And Murray here responds with a little, derisive chuckle and saying, "Oh, libertarian, now you believe this globalist institution, and you're going to believe the word of Putin." So let's play the next bit.
Is it just? Go ahead, because I'm stealing your thunder. I forget.
I have no thunder. Go ahead.
I was just going to say on that. I mean, again, the big picture, just what a ludicrous move that is. And Dave did well to defend himself. I don't know if we're going to include it, but saying things like, a prosecuting attorney who accuses, the defendant of killing somebody and that he was lying with his alibi, but then produces the signed confession. It'd be silly if the defense attorney said, "Oh, well, which is it? Is he a liar, or do you believe his confession?" But then also too, Murray did the same thing early on. And maybe we're going to play this, but it's fine to go ahead and say it now before I forget that. When Dave was citing the thing about, Douglas, what Daryll Cooper was saying is that Hitler, toned down the anti-Semitism in the public speeches in the 1930s and blah, blah, blah. And Murray ripped his head up and then said, among other things, he said it in Mein Kampf. And I'll say, well, which is it? You don't trust him in Munich, right? You don't take Hitler's word there, but you believe Hitler when he was talking about his struggle. So which is it? What? Douglas Murray believes Adolf Hitler. What a fool, right? You know what I mean? So it's just ludicrous. It's just a stupid point. Come on.
It's a pathetic, lame defense. And as you were alluding to, it's a very well-known concept in both law and argumentation that statements made against interest carry some weight because, it's an admission of some sort. It's not like that's not what the propaganda is. That sounds different.
Right.
But when you admit, as commander of NATO, I could have avoided this war immediately if I had just talked to Putin and signed this treaty. All right, let me finish up the bit here.
That's not why Putin invaded. But
you can assert that.
He invaded because of the thing he's dreamt of since he falling down of the Soviet Union.
Do you know how he dreams?
We know a lot from what he said and what he's done since the fall of the Soviet Union and his statements. Certainly very early on in his presidency.
But if he does have a red line and you violate that red line, is that because he's following his dreams, or it's because
his dream is, as he's said many times, is the reconstitution of the Soviet Union's territory?
I don't think that's exactly what he's said. He's alluded many times to how great the Soviet Union was and what a tragedy it is that it collapsed and things like that. But
all right, this is such a big point. I went and looked it up.
I know what you're going to do before you give the substantive thing. Let me just, again, the rhetorical move there. Yeah. So thank goodness for Joe Rogan. Bless you, Mr. Rogan. And if you ever want to have me on, I'm totally free. Is that that Murray, once he just excoriates Dave for, reading private cables and stuff that have been declassified, and to think that, U.S. officials talking to each other behind the scenes might not just be, trying to screw each other up. That how can you can't cite that. And then he says, no, instead I know what Putin dreams of. And then Rogan's like, you know his dreams? And then how did Murray know? He said, well, you can see what he said and wrote.
Which now you believe.
It seems like Douglas Murray is allowed to cite what people say and write to get some inkling as to what their motivations might be, but Dave's not allowed to do that. Okay. Now go ahead and make a more substantive point. I know you're ready.
Well, no, I think that's great. I just can't believe this guy is such... Again, his stock went way down in my eyes, Mr. Murray. So, yeah, I looked up that issue. People have been saying if you're a warmonger, defending the war and all the money we're giving Ukraine, you say, well, we know from what he's said that Putin wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union. He said it many times. I mean, I've heard this all, the talking heads, they just like... Anyway, this is what really happened. The actual quote, which may or may not be accurate, is, quote, anyone who doesn't regret the passing of the Soviet Union has no heart. Anyone who wants it restored has no brains. The talking heads who promote war never say that second sentence. And that's not even an actual quote from Putin. It first appeared in the New York Times as a paraphrase of Putin's views in February of the year 2000. And so that is their source that I'm sure you've heard it dozens of times, Bob. I know I have, that we know from Putin's own lips that he wants to reconstitute the Soviet Union. That is the wretched, weak claim, quote that they're talking about. That. And they don't finish the full quote.
That is, I mean, I guess at this point I shouldn't be shocked, but that is amazing.
Yeah, it really is. So what's next? Yeah, the next one I had was when this is Douglas Murray inadvertently talking about the Black Lives Matter protests. So see if you can figure out what I mean.
This is going to happen. That it's a matter of time. And then the 2014, this was a major provocation toward the Russians, that we backed this street protest against the democratically elected government there.
That's again, it's tricky because the Maidan protests were genuine students in the center of the city who were uprising against a corrupt government.
I'm not even arguing that Ukraine's a corrupt,
and that again, it's like it's the people of Ukraine, like other countries, when they do have agency beyond what Washington.
Yeah, I'm not claiming any of those people don't have agency. I'm just claiming that Washington poured $100 million into the thing and sent our politicians over there. Our politicians openly saying, we're on your side. You have the backing of America. Look, Douglas,
but historically, America has liked to be on the side of people who desire freedom over autocracy.
When it's convenient. Not so much when it's not.
Well, yeah.
Not in Saudi Arabia. Not in Egypt.
I'm glad you joined me in my dislike of the House of Saud.
Okay, fine. But look.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know what you have to say about that, Bob, but for me, it was, this guy doesn't think that all the stuff the CIA through the USAID and the National Endowment for Democracy, pouring all those millions, that doesn't have a thing to do with propping up the natural agency of people just opposing regimes. Really? Nothing?
Yeah. It is this odd thing where, they don't have agency. When again, that's a straw man. Dave, it wasn't denying that.
I think that the Black Lives Matter movement wasn't quite as organic as Joy Reid would have had you believe, right? Yeah. I mean, he thinks that Soros and Kamala Harris, even with that famous, let's all chip in and bail these people out. I mean, I'm sure he thinks all that money and support mattered, right?
You would think so. I was really proud of Dave there. I thought he did a good job of it. Because again, Murray, he's just so, it's like when I was debating Warren Mosler and I was chit-chatting with him before, and he was so charming, and I was like, I gotta get away from this guy. He's gonna like seduce me financially in terms of his financial views. So not taking me out, whining and dining me, though maybe that too. So what like there, what you've noticed what happened is, by the end of it, when he said, "Oh, I see you share my dislike of the House of Assad," and like Rogan couldn't help but start chuckling, and I think Dave even too thought it was funny, when really Dave just completely blew him up, right? That he's sitting there telling us with a straight face that no, the reason the U.S. government opposes, would fund these student movement, these protests or whatever, is because they really just care about helping the little guy around the world. That's the only reason the CIA might engage in regime change or try to fund a coup or something, is because we're just such good guys. We really we're always on the right side of history, and we just stand up for truth and justice in the American way. And that's really it just how ludicrous that is if you know the history of the CIA. And so, I was glad that Dave said, well, right, that's how we spin it, and whenever it suits us, we do that, but it's not like another. So anyway, instead of, again, Murray, like, oh yeah, you got me, I am completely full of crap, haha. Instead, you show my distaste of the House of Assad, am I right? So anyway.
All right, here's probably my favorite one of this episode.
Oh, are we there yet?
We're there, yeah.
I'm trying to keep my excitement at bay.
No, let it loose. Let loose that mighty yawp. All right, this is the one where Dave starts telling Douglas Murray, and again, I don't think Murray knew any of this history, that General Wesley Clark revealed that there was a neocon plan to overthrow 7 countries in 5 years. I don't think Murray had ever heard of that.
Yeah. So how much are we going to play? Just so how much background should we give on this?
A bunch, because I'm going to the one. Most of this is where Murray is belittling how influential Wolfowitz is.
Oh, okay, yeah. So,
and insinuating that we're all
right.
Anti-Semitic.
Yes, what is it? Yeah. Okay. So just to give a little bit of context, because also I wanted to make some points on that too. Right. So again, folks, what's going on here? If you've never seen it, I had toyed with us including the clip here, but I just thought, Adam, I knew we were going to go over time anyway, so it wasn't going to work. But there's a famous thing where Wesley Clark, was he a 4-star general? Am I getting that right? I think so. He was on, it was Democracy Now! And he was on the stage. I don't know where they were, but they were in front of a live audience. And he was admitting that after 9/11, he was in Washington. He went into the Pentagon or something, and somebody called him in and said, "Hey, boss, you got to come." And so he was like not directly involved like that, but he wasn't. He was just visiting, and the guy showed him plans that they had to, and go into Iraq and then invade. Was it 7 countries over the next 5 years? Is that
you'll hear that part. It's just he won't go into great depth.
Yeah, and so then so that's a big thing. And Murray's response to that is, oh well, yeah, it's and by the way, and all those countries have come true. Is that in there?
Here's the part that is not in here, which makes me think Douglas Murray never even heard of this. He didn't believe the list existed because he's looking up at the ceiling and goes, Somalia, Sudan. Why would America even want to overthrow these regimes?
Yeah.
So he'd never heard this. This is news that never got through his propaganda-laden filter in a hotel on the ground in Israel or Ukraine or whatever. So the thing is, in case this isn't on your radar either, you should go look it up. It's shocking. Like Adam and I actually a while ago when they were what was the regime when Syria fell. Right, you and I actually toyed with doing a whole episode just on that, and the because like not enough people were talking about it. Like, what the heck? Because what's happened is every single country except Iran has come true. Right, so the timetable was off. Right, it was more than 5 years. But in terms of the countries on this list that Wesley Clark said in this Democracy Now! Taping, I forget what year. Do you remember what year? Was it like mid 2000s? I don't remember when he said this. But 05, 06, something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. So he's saying. There was this list I saw of this is the countries the U.S. is going to topple over the next 5 years. And every single one of them now at this point has come true except Iran. And it's not like we're getting along swimmingly with Iran right now. And so, again, when so Dave kind of thinks that might be relevant to something. And Murray's response was like Adam is saying, like, why would anyone even, whose interest does that serve? And then also he made it look like, oh, well, yeah, I mean, the U.S., I should hope that they have plans for any contingency. He tried to make it look like it was just a, hey, if we ever have to invade Jamaica, how would we do it? How many Marines would we send it? When it was like, so like you're saying, either he's just lying through his teeth or he really didn't know. And either way is shocking.
No, that's a great point. And let's remember this timeline in the argument here. Dave Dave says the United States has been doing regime changes all over the place, and he cites Libya. And Murray corrects him and says, well, no, we had great reason to believe that Gaddafi was going to murder half of his population. And Dave says, well, that's mighty suspicious. And then he lets this, 7 countries in 5 years thing. And again, Murray just never heard of it anyway. And then this happened. So let's get back to
that was just a prelude, folks.
That was just a prelude for the real amazing debate tactics.
And finishing off with Iran. He laid out the path of what we're about to do, and then we did it in the next administration. You don't think there was any connection between those two?
What, we did Somalia and Sudan?
No, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. If you go look at the list of 7 countries, it was Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Libya, I believe Somalia, Sudan, and Iran, I believe.
Why would America want to do any of those things? Who wants to do it?
Well, what he said is that essentially these plans, he said later in an interview with Piers Morgan, that he had seen the plans at first in 1991, that they came from Paul Wolfowitz, that basically then they got, what's funny about what the 4-star general said?
It's okay, continue.
No, I'm just curious, what's laughable about this?
Paul Wolfowitz is a great figure for almost any deep conspiracy in this country, because he was a deputy secretary of defense at the highest in his life. He is forever being ascribed almost supernatural power.
I don't think anyone's
the highest position he ever got to was as Donald Rumsfeld's deputy, and it's a very strange thing always when Wolfowitz's name comes up, because he was a relatively low-level person to whom almost everything can be ascribed. And
I didn't describe, again, this is such a straw man. I didn't ascribe everything to him. I'm literally telling you what
anyway, go on.
No, I'm telling you what the 4-star general said about him. And I wouldn't say deputy secretary of defense is like a nothing position. It's a pretty consequential position.
Not as important as Rumsfeld or Cheney, but yeah.
Yeah, agreed. But who said it was?
No, fire on.
I just feel like you're batting down straw men. I never said that he is the creator of all conspiracies or anything. I'm literally saying that the 4-star general said that he first saw the plans from him, that he had brought this to the National Security Advisor, and it had basically been like, we'll look at this after the election, and that then it was resurrected later by Richard Perle, and that these guys were producing. Again, not me saying this. This is 4-star General Wesley Clark. He said in a study paid for by the Israelis. And yeah, you can laugh at this all you want to, Douglas, but you can go read the clean break memo for yourself. This was the neoconservative strategy, along with their counterpart, the Likud in Israel, that they wanted to remake the region in a way, and I'm sure by their own justification, they believed that democracy would sweep the region and it would be better off for them. Nonetheless, they pursued this path that has ended in nothing but disaster. And I don't think that to say that in 2011, it was like a purely humanitarian mission to go overthrow Muammar Gaddafi, I do not think is right.
Well, first of all, before I get to the substance of it, why would they want the current situation in Libya?
Huh?
Why would they want the current situation in Libya?
Well, because they wanted Gaddafi out.
Why?
Well, okay, if you read the clean break memo, what their argument essentially is that you wanted to have regime change against the hostile surrounding Muslim countries.
But
was Gaddafi not hostile to Israel?
To Israel, yeah, sure. But he was, I mean, the Europeans and everybody else in NATO found that Gaddafi was a really relatively easy person to get on with latterly.
Right? Yeah, no, I think it was an insane policy.
No, but you'll notice that after he hands over the nuclear program and thus makes himself very vulnerable, unfortunately, for the future of world peace, Libya has been unutterably disastress for Europe. Hang on.
No, just a clarifying question.
Disastrous for Europe.
I agree with you.
And Somalia and Sudan. Why does America or Israel want to do regime change in Somalia?
Can I just ask you a clarifying question on this? What when you say that was a disaster for the prospects of world peace, you mean overthrowing Gaddafi was a disaster?
I say that him being. Sorry, I should have clarified. My thing is, him being overthrown after he's given over the nuclear weapons is a disaster, because it leaves on the table this thing that you have to hold on to nuclear weapons, and if you don't hold on to nuclear weapons, you could be dead.
Do you think maybe the Israelis should stop using the term the Libyan model to push for negotiations with Iran?
No, I don't think anyone should use what happened to Gaddafi as being a good precursor.
We certainly have a lot of agreement there. It was an absolute disaster, particularly to do it, to let a guy get sodomized to death after he denuclearized is not a good precedent to set.
I agree, and that's one of the reasons why
Iran wants a nuke so bad.
And I'm not sure it's just to avert being sodomized to death, as you put it, but yeah, they want a nuke because if you like what the Iranian revolutionary government's done since 1979, you'd love what they'll do with the world when they've got a nuke. But anyway, put that aside for a second. I mean, I'm sorry, we slightly come back to where we started, but when you start talking about Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Perle, it's all awfully noxious smelling. Richard Perle was a member of the Defense Policy Board, which had an advisory capacity toward the Pentagon in the early 2000s, but it was by no means a policy board that dictated Pentagon policy. Okay. In the last 30 years of American foreign policy, there have been many major actors. Paul Wolfowitz is a relatively major one. But we come slightly back full circle. In my view, I'm not saying you're guilty of this, certainly not knowingly. In my view, when people start talking about Paul Wolfowitz, I always remember that line of Mark Stein's many years ago. And he said, you can't help thinking that one of the reasons why people find Wolfowitz so appealing to talk about is that his name starts with a nasty animal and ends Jewish.
That is a funny thing to say.
People love saying Wolfowitz.
It's such a great name.
It is
for an evil villain in a movie.
You can say, aha. Yeah. He's perfect for it. Perfect for it.
And he looks perfect for it.
Right. You'll say, oh, the crafty Paul Wolfowitz.
His crazy eyebrows.
So you're a bigot. You're a Jew hater if you mention the neocons?
No. Just let me continue with the thought.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember those days, and his boss, Donald Rumsfeld, was like the ruler of the world at that time. He had such charisma, such genius was attributed to him for the initial invasion of Iraq. Like people, you can't imagine the admiration that existed in the defense establishments around the world for Rumsfeld. Dick Cheney was so powerful that people of right and left, particularly on the left, spent all those years in the W. Bush administration saying W wasn't the real president. He was being run by Dick Cheney because he was the brilliant, et cetera, et cetera.
You're certainly listening to him at the beginning.
Okay, but I'm just saying it goes back to this thing of when certain ideas catch hold and what's really going on in them. Now, to attribute American foreign policy in the last 40 years to Paul Wolfowitz and Dick Perle is, knowingly or otherwise, to encourage a conspiracy that has very obvious legs. And I just urge you not to do it.
Okay.
All righty then. I have much to say about this, but we also have another clip to play. Would you like my commentary first or that clip?
Why don't we go ahead and play the clip, just because I want it to be fresh with what he just said, and I don't want to lose that with our analysis. But I do want to hear your response. But let's play the clip because of the juxtaposition, I think. So as you're pulling that up, I'll just tell people. So this ran. I found this clip of Douglas Murray. This was in 2023, and this was like the anniversary of the Iraq invasion, and he had written a column. You know, because as Adam alluded to, he was a big supporter of the Iraq invasion. He had a book in 2006 saying to the people in the UK that we need to embrace neoconservatism. This is the way to save our party and whatnot, or our movement. And so in 2023, he wrote a piece, reminiscing on, my thoughts and whatever. And so now here he is on Spectator TV. He's being interviewed. This is you can see the thing. Douglas Murray, was I right about the Iraq war? And so here we're just going to queue up, and we're going to play a short little clip where he relays an anecdote that at that point I think had been in recent past of when he went to Iraq. Because again, he's a journalist. He goes to places. He wouldn't write about a country unless he's been there. So let's hear what happened when he did go to Iraq. I'm curious to see.
Aren't we all? Here we go.
In those days, I mentioned in my piece that on one occasion, Ankur and I were visiting a Kurdish rights center in northern Iraq, and I was at least quite amused by the fact that the framed photos going all the way through the hallway and up the stairs were of people like Paul Wolfowitz, Donald Rumsfeld, Richard Perle, then of the Defense Policy Board, people who back home in America, in Britain, were all viewed with incredible disdain and disgust by that point, but who in this section of Iraq were regarded as heroes because they had argued the case of the Kurdish people, among other things, and their liberation from the tyranny of the Saddam Hussein regime. And as I mentioned, it's just one of those sort of reminders that, you know, history is so much more complex when you're going through it than when you look back with all of the benefits of hindsight.
So I'm sure you, Adam, you know, you probably looked at that before you played it here live. I'm sure you were intrigued and puzzled because when I heard him start that anecdote and say that he went to this, you know, place in the Kurdish region and he saw all these photographs, I was expecting him to say, and then I said to the people,
what are you doing?
Yeah, the very idea that there's this cabal of neoconservative thinkers who can influence U.S. military policy. Don't you know? Have you ever been to Washington? The president is a Texas oilman. He's a Christian. I find this entire line of argument to be rubbish. But
I'm sure he gave him a dressing down, but he's not going to say that on TV.
Yeah, it's not quite what he said there, if you noticed. He didn't, in any way say it's kind of weird that they think Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Perle had anything to do with the Kurds, but, hey, more power to them. I didn't want to burst their bubble.
Yeah, listening to Douglas Murray talk there, you would think that Paul Wolfowitz and Richard Perle had almost nothing to do with foreign policy in the United States. And that anyone bring it up, the only reason they're doing that is the one with the very noxious odor that they're secret anti-Semites blaming the Jews, in scare quotes, for all the world's problems. And, probably nobody even knows who Wolfowitz and Perle are. You guys are just pulling them from, they were probably just, in the mailroom or whatever, right?
Yeah. Well, by the way, sorry. Can I just real quick?
Yeah,
so this is, go ahead. I don't mean to cut you off. I'm sorry.
Ahead.
Yeah. So there's a book on, this history, and it says, it's talking about, what led the U.S. into, the invasions. But the appetite for regime change was simply not there. The definite notion of the link between insecurity at home and hostile dictatorship abroad was not yet entrenched. Even Paul Wolfowitz was not advocating the toppling of the Iraqi menace. But so they're talking about like the first time, but the who's writing it? That's Douglas Murray in his 2006 book on neoconservatism. Okay, so there it's weird if Paul Wolfowitz is a nothing burger. Why is he saying? Oh, even Paul Wolfowitz at this time, referring to before 9/11, I believe this was, wasn't advocating changing the Iraq regime. This was just Operation Desert Shield. Is that the first one when they kicked them out?
Storm. In the 90s, early 90s?
Yes. Wasn't their Operation Shield? Desert Shield?
I think it's switched.
Okay. Well, anyway.
In the early 90s. Anyway.
So the point being that it's weird. He's in that. It's weird. It's weird, isn't it? It's weird.
It's a weird move.
He's there saying even Richard or even Paul Wolfowitz wasn't advocating regime change at that point. So why do we care? That'd be like saying even Paul Rubens wasn't in favor. Like, who cares? He has nothing to do with anything. So it's weird.
I'm inclined to believe that modern Douglas Murray is right, as opposed to former Douglas Murray. But modern tells us that Wolfowitz is nobody, and anyone who brings him up is a racist, which means we're in trouble, because the AI minds that are going to run, the machine takeover of our civilization are apparently anti-Semites too.
Why is that?
I asked Grok, quote, who were the prominent neocons in the Bush-Obama administrations? And it said, in the George Bush administration, neoconservatism significantly shaped foreign policy, particularly post 9/11, with figures advocating for the Iraq War and democracy promotion. Prominent neoconservatives included, guess who's at the top of the list? Paul Wolfowitz, Deputy Secretary of Defense, a key architect of the Iraq War, pushing regime change and U.S. primacy. Number 2, Richard Perle, Chairman of the Defense Policy Board, influential in advocating military action against Iraq. And then it follows with Douglas Feith, Elliot Abrams, Louis Scooter Libby, John Bolton, and then gets on to Dick Cheney and Donald Rumsfeld. And Grok has a minor quibble in that they are not considered neocons. And then going on to Obama, Grok mentions Victoria Nuland and Robert Kagan. But the real scary thing is, why is Grok so anti-Semitic?
I don't know.
I asked some more questions. Want to hear?
Yeah.
I asked Grok, what is PNAC? I just gave the acronym. And who is associated with it? Grok comes back with the Project for the New American Century. PNAC was a neoconservative think tank founded in blah-bitty-blue-bitty-blue. So who was in it? It gives us another list. William Crystal, Robert Kagan, Paul Wolfowitz, Richard Perle, Donald Rumsfeld, and Dick Cheney. So I don't know if Dave Smith is a secret Jew hater for mentioning Wolfowitz and Perle. Grok is too. Maybe we should investigate ChatGPT, and if they turn out to be anti-Semites, maybe we should shut down the whole AI LLM project for our own racial safety.
So on this issue, so let's see. One thing is, and Dave pointed this out, I think it was even the clip you played, but the move that was made, it's not that Dave said, and when you try to understand what's shaping world history, I think it's this Paul Wolfowitz character. He led with the 4-star general, right, and the thing that apparently, you're right, the more we listen to that again, I think Murray truly had never heard that before. And then when Murray challenged him and said, well, where did he get, Dave volunteered, he was asked, well, what Wesley Clark said as to where he first saw it was back in 90s, blah, 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 with Wolfowitz. So Dave was not leading with that. It was only upon being asked where'd this come from. So again, even what the story Dave was telling, it was not that Wolfowitz declared, I, as the emperor of, this international conspiracy, am going to now issue this ultimatum, and this is what we're going to do. He's just saying they crafted it and moved up the chain of command, and apparently
when Dave said
the powers that be endorsed it.
When Dave said Wolfowitz's name in response to that question, Murray sat back in his smug chair and laughed. Oh, here we go. Another anti-Semitic trope.
Yep.
That was shocking.
And the other move he did that I didn't even fully get it until just watching it now was Murray said his argument ran like this. Dave was saying, yes, the U.S. ended up fighting all these wars on behalf of a bunch of thinkers who are advancing the interest of Israel. And then the way Murray showed that couldn't be right is he was like, why would the European powers want that to happen?
Right.
Which is like, that doesn't at all prove that, you know what I'm saying? Like it was weird that it's weird that he was giving arguments like that. So somebody who thinks for some reason, it seems like a bunch of people with ties to Israel have a lot of influence over U.S. foreign policy, even when it's not in our interest and it's not in the interest of people there. And again, it was like, well, why would they have done that? Do you like Libya now? I mean, that would be like saying, you could say it's just about anything. Well, gee, why did World War II happen? I mean, are you telling me the German people liked the situation in 1946? So clearly Germany wouldn't have started the war. You think the German people liked 1946 and felt good about everything? I doubt that. So clearly they couldn't have started the war. What are you talking about, Douglas Murray? I mean, the mind boggles.
The mind does indeed boggle. I mean, right out of the gate, Douglas Murray just came out so weirdly aggressive and seeming, I mean, I thought it was irrational. Like, he came at Joe for platforming all these people who were on the other side from Israel in this conflict and just not having enough people on in support. And so Joe rattles off like 3, and I don't know, he just dismisses it. And then, I mean, I don't know if you have anything specific to say about how Douglas Murray came after Joe, but I was even more shocked by the fact that he was willing to be so critical of Douglas Murray without having the slightest idea who he was. You mean
Daryll Cooper?
Sorry, Daryll Cooper, yeah. Without having the slightest idea of who he was, not listening to a single thing except, I assume, like a 40-second clip on Tucker.
Oh, yeah, like he got his name wrong. Like he was fumbling around his name, and then, in case people don't see it, like, we're not going to play the clip, right? We should just talk about it?
We're going to play something real short. Probably not the one where he didn't know his name, but
the one where he says, I don't need to listen to him. Do you have that one?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, because I don't want to steal it, but yeah, it was amazing.
Well, he says it twice. Let's see
Okay.
which one I have.
Okay.
Of experts who are not experts.
You mean like Ian? I don't think he appoints himself an expert in anything.
Who's that other dude who thinks he's an expert on Churchill?
Daryll Cooper
Daryl.
does not think he's an expert.
No, in fact, I think it's everybody else is always calling him an expert, and he's like, I'm just a history.
Have you
nerd.
ever absorbed any of his material? Have you ever consumed any of his podcasts or anything like
I
that?
tried.
Yeah.
It's pretty hard to listen to somebody who says, I don't know what I'm talking about, but now I'm going to talk. Or I don't know about this. Or I'm not capable of debating this historian, but I'm going to just tell you what I think.
Yeah, but that's not
I think that's a
exactly
little
that's
bit
not
out of
exactly what
context.
Daryl was saying. I mean, Daryl's point of view, however you feel about this, what Daryl's saying is he doesn't really like doing debates. He likes to do long format stuff where he can really explain his position.
If you throw a lot of shit out there, there's some point at which I'm just raising questions is not a valid thing.
Mm-hmm.
You're not raising questions. You're not asking questions. You're telling people something.
Do you think Daryl's doing that?
I think there's a whole bunch of guys doing that.
I
I
think-
think Dave is doing that.
So there you go. He mischaracterizes massively what both Daryll Cooper and Dave Smith are doing, and then admits he hasn't the slightest idea who he's talking about. And in another hour, he's going to say Dave should shut the hell up about places he's never actually gone and visited in person.
Yeah.
You can talk about podcasters without listening to them.
Yeah, and for people who didn't see it, Adam's not exaggerating. Later, there was a short thing too. We don't need to play that, where they said, like, "Have you listened to his New Jerusalem?" He said, "I don't need to listen to it."
Mhm.
You know, and then also too, he was talking about something quick, and they said, "I mean, he's put out like 30-hour podcast series," and he's like, "Oh, come on, what the hell is that?" Or something. Like he was like it was nothing, you know.
To steel man what's going on in Douglas Murray's head. Not that it justifies it in the slightest, but I'm sure he has heard horrible, racist, right-wing extremism stuff all over the internet. And for some reason, he's conflating all of that and putting it on Dave and the
Right.
Martyr Made podcast, which is ridiculous and unfair and stupid, frankly. But I think that's what he's doing.
Yeah. So let me, in fairness to Murray, so it is true. I think Daryll Cooper, so in case people don't know what he's talking about, so Daryll Cooper was on Tucker Carlson's show, and he said a very provocative thing. You know, he had caveats, but he did say, I think Winston Churchill is the chief villain of World War II. He said that, and then, you know, he and Tucker had a thing, and that was a huge deal. And then I believe it was Piers Morgan wanted to have him on to debate, you know, one of the preeminent historians of biographers of Churchill. And Daryll Cooper said no. And so I understand that if Murray had just confined himself to you know, criticizing Cooper and saying, if you're going to throw out something like that on a big show, and then when there's a, you know, serious historian who wants to debate you and you just duck, I get, and also too, I think Cooper said something along the lines of, no, I mean, he's the real Churchill expert, right? So I get what, you know, he didn't just say, hey, I'm just at raising questions or asking questions. So I understand what Murray is saying with respect to Daryll Cooper. I think it's unfair, but I get, you know, he's not completely, whereas with Dave, like we said at the beginning of this episode, Adam, Dave has never, in the hundreds of hours I've listened to him, said when challenged with something, oh yeah, I mean, I hope you guys aren't taking my views on Palestine too seriously. Hey, I'm just a guy telling jokes. What do I know? That's not at all what he says. It's ridiculous that Robbie and I, you know, are the source of information on COVID and blah, blah, blah for a bunch of you. But that's just because the institutions, the so-called experts, are lying through their teeth. And I'll put my track record up, right? So it's sort of like when Rush Limbaugh, for people who are older and listen to him, in the beginning, he really was kind of just entertained. And then he just kind of grew into, you know, where he was giving serious commentary, and a lot of Republicans were like listening to him and whatnot, you know, office holder. And I think Dave's done the same thing, that, yeah, if you listened to his show years ago, it would be more jokey. But it is definitely, you know, when he's going around debating people on Israel, Palestine, or whatever, I mean, Dave really tries to get his facts right. And if he got something wrong, he wants to know. And so this idea that he just, I'm just a comedian, he doesn't say that.
He never does.
It's obnoxious.
To listen to Douglas Murray, you'd think Dave Smith would just, you know, whenever challenged, would go, hey, I'm just a comedian. You don't think these stories we all tell up here on stage are real, right?
Right.
I mean, we make stuff up because it's total mischaracterization. We're running shortish on time. I don't know how long we want to go, but I want to move to one that I'll just be furious if we don't hit. If you don't mind.
Yeah. The balls. Yeah, I've hit my main things. I'm happy. You
All
go.
right, I think I have two more. They're not that long. But this one really pissed me off on two fronts.
What am I pushing?
Yes.
Liberty, free markets, peace, prosperity, not getting in another stupid catastrophic war, which we're on the precipice of right now. That's what I'm pushing.
What are we on the precipice of?
Well, I think weren't you just talking about it the other day? Everyone I hear on the inside says we're about to attack Iran. I think you just said something about that the other day. Am I wrong about that? I thought I saw in one of your interviews that you did.
Possibly.
No. Okay.
That doesn't mean we are on the verge of a war. I mean, you keep referring to we being in wars. There's a very big difference between a country having a military that's engaged and a country being at war. This country has not been at war for 25 years. You have not been fighting for the American homeland for 25 years.
Yes, we haven't. That's true.
Right.
We haven't had a war on our shores. We've been picking on third world countries halfway around the world.
Well, you haven't been randomly picking on them. I mean, Afghanistan, you went.
I didn't say it was random.
Yeah, right. Okay. It wasn't like you suddenly decided to bomb, again, Myanmar or something. We went for Afghanistan to find bin Laden and take revenge for 9/11 and stop an attack like that happening again on the American homeland. That is very different from a country being at war.
Yeah, but that's a total mischaracterization of the war in Afghanistan. It's one thing to say that might be an accurate characterization of the special operations mission in late 2001, but then we fought a 20-year regime change war against the Taliban.
Because you got dragged into the quicksand of war.
Oh,
yes.
Okay, fine. But
fine.
I thought it wasn't a war. Like, what? I don't get your argument.
No, I said it was a war. It's your use of we, as if you're personally like suffering this war. I mean, you're a taxpayer.
When I say we're taxpayers,
implied, so we pay for it. Okay, fine.
Douglas, would you go, if I went back and corrected you on every time you've used the term we to refer to your government or something like that? Like if I were to say, oh, we just imposed tariffs on China, would you point out that I didn't and it was the Trump administration?
I'm saying you take it obviously very personally, and that's your right to do so, of course. I'm just trying to make sure we're accurate here.
What do you think I'm taking personally?
Just that, the American wars.
Sure, yeah. I think they've killed hundreds of thousands of people and cost my country $8 trillion and degraded my country very much.
And there's a very good argument to make on that. I'm still slightly bemused about this move from I'm an expert on this and I have views to I'm a comedian.
I've never claimed to be an expert on anything.
This is the problem, Joe. I mean, if somebody
Wait a minute,
says
you have to claim to be an expert on something to have an opinion on something.
You don't have to be. You don't have to be. But
so
this is like
issue?
I'm not a historian, but I'm pumping out history.
But wait a minute,
I'm not an expert, but I'm talking all the time about this.
But you're not even talking about specifically on what he just said.
No, I'm saying this is my point about this. You say I'm not an expert.
So what's the solution? To not talk about it?
No, it's to have more experts around.
No, the expert class hasn't done a great job.
I know.
Man. This is follow the science.
Yeah, but you know what? I agree with that. I just said to you, I agree with that.
Right. I know.
But
so
one
Douglas,
of the problems
during all of COVID, I will put my track record against any of the expert class on COVID. I'm glad to do that. So should I have just shut up? Should I have shut up by opposing lockdowns and opposing vaccine mandates?
So, every time I rewatch these clips, I'm seeing more little subtleties of what a stick he is.
Yeah. I mean, that segment just pissed me off so much.
Can I just say the real quick thing before I forget, if you don't mind? I know you want to rant, but the thing I noticed in this thing that I might, it was very quick, but in the beginning, when Dave matter-of-factly says, you know, when we're getting ready to go invade Iran, and then he's like, what are you talking about? And he goes, you know, the insiders I talked to, right? And Murray was making it sound like, what are you, nuts? And then Dave said, I mean, didn't you just say that in one of your interviews? And he went, possibly. And then he moved on. I was like, what?
What? Yeah. I couldn't believe he didn't deny it, but he was just like, oh yeah, of course I said you were about to bomb Iran. Yeah, well, why are we bringing that up? There was just so much there, so much shifting of the goalposts. That condescending,
the thing with
condescending thing that. No, all right, go ahead.
I'm sorry. It just because I have it right in my that, you know, Dave's what, and then he goes, and then Dave made a perfectly reasonable point, and Murray was like, and we can have that argument if you like, Yes, Dave would like to have. That's what he's trying to do.
I'd love to.
And Dave's like, please argue with me. And then he's like, and this is what I mean, Joe, that when he's challenged, he resorts to, I'm just a comedian. It was amazing to behold. Oh, and then he said, but the point is, I'm bemused. Like, what a stick.
He is a stick. The constant shifting of the goalpost, calling out Dave for the imprecision of using the word we when he does it himself all the time. And then in that short segment, he chastises soft, weak American Dave for having the temerity to say that you've been at war for the last over the last 25 years. You haven't been at war. Other countries have been at war. And then, when Dave makes another point, about, what happened in Afghanistan, Murray says, well, yeah, he got sucked into the quagmire of war. Oops. I almost expected him to throw his hands up and go, oops. I guess it was a war.
And you, right? Was
right.
Dave over there in the quagmire?
Right.
I didn't know that Dave had the pack on and he had the rations and he was looking around with his buddies in night vision goggles. I didn't know that about Dave. I thought he was just a failed comedian. I didn't realize he was also sucked into the quagmire over there in Afghanistan. Interesting.
Yeah,
I noticed on that thing too. Did you see? I think Rogan literally held up his left hand to tell Dave, "Hang on, I'm intervening as the ref here."
Yeah.
And said, I forget the exact word, but it was clear he was telling Dave, "Wait a minute, I'm intervening," and wait a minute, you're not addressing what he just said.
Yeah. Oh, I forgot what I was going to say. Like over and over throughout this whole encounter, I mean, my highly unscientific poker playing spidey sense, I just saw a guy that kept finding himself backed into a corner and then pulling a move to try and get out of the center of the ring and just dodging and wheeling. And I think that's why he was so rude, because I think he was just resorting to his rhetorical flourishes to try and land a blow, because I don't think he was not prepared for all these facts and arguments that Dave was.
Right.
And Dave handled himself so solidly.
Yeah, I think he probably was like, whoa, like not realizing how much.
Yeah.
Like even there, this little thing, like just to contrast it with me, I am by no means an expert, and I don't just mean, I'm not an expert. I mean, like I really can't. Like you see how 15 minutes ago I was fumbling. Wait, was it Operation Desert Storm or Shield? And I couldn't remember. Whereas there, Dave was like, well, I mean, if you're referring to the special operations in Afghanistan, well, then you know what I mean. Like Dave really knows his timeline and knows specific things. And so, yeah, I think Douglas Murray, if he just thought this is Bill Hicks, except, 20 years younger. And Bill Hicks was a relatively well-educated stand-up comic for geopolitical, but I'm just saying Dave Smith can sit there and give you a lecture on the history of Israel Palestine. I don't know that Hicks could have done that. I've never seen evidence that Hicks knows these things with as much intricate detail as Dave. Like I agree with a lot of Hicks, takes on things and his general vibe, but anyway.
There was one here that is a little spicy. Let's do that one, and let's do this last one.
Okay, a spicy one.
It's spicy.
It's kind of like with each successive one, you're wondering, surely that's got to be it.
Yeah, you'd think. All right, here we go.
And there are many reasons. One, at the most fundamental level, is that I think a part of a generation that's coming up has been told there is something especially wicked about Israel, that there is something especially wicked about Israel's existence and its actions and its people. And it means that when their people are burned alive in their homes or raped at a music festival and shot in the head, they are uniquely undeserving of sympathy. And I think that people have been indoctrinated by very bad actors into this, and as a result have excused atrocities or will make excuses for them, make excuses for the people who do them. I think, in addition, it plays to some of the darkest things of the regional mind.
All right. So I think Douglas Murray is correct here. But it seemed to me like a complete and utter admission of his own mindset.
Yep.
This is exactly how pro-war on the Israel side people, these neocons, these Sam Harrises, these Douglas Murrays, this is exactly how they talk. They consider that Hamas and therefore all these Palestinians are collectively guilty for past crimes, and therefore it does not matter what is done to them. They are less than human. They are not worthy of any kind of sympathy or empathy, and therefore atrocities that are committed against them should be excused. I mean, whose side are you on, the right one or the wrong one? And it's just, as he was saying that, my heartstrings got tugged a little bit. He's exactly right, but you do the exact same thing, man. Can't you see that?
Right. There were several times throughout that. The one you just said was probably the most poignant, where, yeah, I thought as well that, don't you realize that you are describing yourself? Like, it was eerie that he didn't see it. Whereas it's not true that Dave's just the mirror image. It's not that Dave, which in fairness, there are people that are completely callous and, would like say on October 7th, like not care, like when Murray was going through and these girls who were just there at the disco and, driving Palestinian children to the hospital and whatnot. And they're left wing and want to live in peace. And they deserve to be raped and brutalized. And it's not like Dave was like, well, yeah, I think so, because, Netanyahu's a jerk. Like, that's not Dave. He's like, yeah, of course. That's horrible. Right. Whereas there are a lot of people who really hate Israel and Jewish people and blah, blah, blah.
Sure. But that's not Dave.
But yes, that's what I'm saying. So it's not just, oh yeah, they're mirror image, that Dave is the guy who agrees with Murray's sentiment there. And ironically, of the three at that table, the person who is completely indifferent and unmoved by massive human suffering and a bunch of toddlers dying that have nothing to do with anything is Douglas Murray.
Bob, would you indulge me in playing one more clip where Dave dismantles that fog of war argument that was just so eloquent, but so stupid?
The people who have gone along with the ride for us right now, they can't let go. They're about to get fired from work, but go ahead.
All right. Well,
kids are begging them to read them a bedtime story. No, hang on. Just one more clip.
Simultaneously, I'm going to say you're welcome and we're sorry. All right.
Also, that being said, there's a very strong argument that there were many policies that the U.S., NATO and Europe as well, but mostly the U.S. pursued that were just almost like, if you wanted to come to this inevitable conflict, this would have been the policy to pursue to give you the best chance to end up
one
there.
of the, I was with a British military friend recently, and somebody asked, what does the fog of war mean? And he gave a brilliant example of what it means on the battlefield, which a lot of people don't understand. There's a version of the fog of war in history as well. The great Czech writer Milan Kundera had this beautiful phrase in a book of his from the 90s called Testaments Betrayed, where he said, the odd thing about mankind is, he said, we walk through life in a fog and we stumble along a path and we create the path as we stumble along it. So that's not the interesting thing. The interesting thing is that when we look back, we see the man and we see the path, but we don't see the fog. Everything looks inevitable when you're standing in the present. Everything looks like it was going to happen this way, and you have these endless, often fascinating, often futile explorations of what might have been.
I mean, I just want to pause here for a second to say that's a mic drop, right? I mean, how could you
Rogan
ever?
was impressed.
Wow, so eloquent. How could you ever criticize anything that's done in war? Because after all, fog, you just don't realize. Well, just wait.
But it was the great Czech writer who said,
yeah, that's the great. He is an English major.
Yeah,
kudos where it's deserved.
Military and the Pentagon.
So, okay, that's fine. You've taken your swing, Doug. Here comes Dave.
But it doesn't take into account the fog.
It's a very good point.
And the fog of Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union was pretty considerable. The efforts in the 1990s to bring them into a more obvious part of the international order failed. And my own view has always been that, in part, we missed an opportunity to pay a kind of civilizational respect to the Russians, which they deserved. But also throughout the period that people now say there are all of these off-ramps, and now so many people claim that NATO went around the region desperately trying to provoke the Russians into some kind of war, or inevitably leading them that way because of NATO expansionism. They never take into account what was, in my memory and experience, very clear, which was NATO didn't go around recruiting. people came to NATO, countries came to NATO wanting to join, precisely because they feared the aggression that Ukrainians have suffered since February 2022, and indeed before. I was in Georgia just after the 2008 war began, the country, not the state. Always has to be confirmed, otherwise people are like, what?
Right.
Who invaded Georgia?
We attacked Georgia.
They're the bastards. But I was in the country of Georgia, and Putin had tried to invade them and had seized South Ossetia and Abkhazia. And they were desperate to join NATO. In fact, they're desperate to join the European Union. I rather frivolously said to a Georgian friend, if you want, we can swap. You can take our British membership of the EU. But in the NATO thing, they were desperate for it. And they were desperate for it precisely for the reason that many of the Ukrainians were desperate for it, which was only way to stop Putin expansionism. So, in the whole fog of the post-Soviet era, that is one of the many things that gets left out of the conversation. And by the way, Putin's actions in February 2022 and since, all he's done is provoke 2 new countries to join NATO, and his borders with NATO have grown.
That's true.
Finland and Sweden wanted to join. And the only reason Finland and Sweden wanted to join was because they too are scared. It's a heck of a thing to get the Swedish to join a military alliance. It doesn't come easy to them. It doesn't come natural. And these countries joined because, like Georgia, like Ukraine, they desperately feared Putinist expansionism, and they weren't wrong.
Okay, but I get your point. First off, the war in Georgia in 2008 actually came, what was it, 2 or 3 months after the Bucharest summit, where NATO announced that Georgia and Ukraine would be entering NATO. So just making that point that the NATO aspirations came first. But listen, I don't think you're wrong. I don't think anybody is ever implying that like we've expanded NATO through force and that the countries who were joining, or at least the governments of the countries who were joining, didn't want it. Although in the case of Ukraine, there's a great piece in the Washington Post about this in 2006, where joining NATO was actually very unpopular. And there was a lot done, and largely because they just didn't want to take on the headache of the conflict that this might provoke. But, the question, I think, isn't necessarily like, do these countries wish to join NATO? Of course, I think most countries in the world would like to join NATO. I think most countries in the world would like the most powerful government in the history of the world to guarantee their defense and subsidize their defense. The question is that in America's interest? And in terms of your point of seeing through the fog, I mean, look, there was, as you know well, in the 90s, in the late 90s, during the first round of NATO expansion, there was a lively debate amongst this. And I don't mean a debate amongst outsiders or experts or whatever. I mean, within the real deal experts, the wisest graybeards in the national security apparatus, there was a real debate with at least 3 secretaries of defense who warned against this. Robert Gates, Robert McNamara, William Perry, the secretary of defense at the time, almost resigned, said his biggest regret in life is that he didn't resign over it. George Kennan was able to see right through that fog. He literally said, the Cold Warrior, founder of the containment strategy, saw right through that fog and goes, this will inevitably lead to a conflict with Russia. And his exact words were, and then when there's a Russian response, everybody will say, look, this is why we needed to expand NATO. But the point here is, okay, even within that deep debate, which there were lively debates about, even the people who were on the pro-expansionist side of things, like Henry Kissinger, even he said Ukraine would have to be a special arrangement. Ukraine will not come into NATO because obviously that's leading to a war with Russia.
So there you go. Douglas Murray would have you believe that everyone was just bewildered that Russia would be upset about the Ukraine. I mean, it's the fog of war, and the eloquent thing with the guy and the path and the fog. You can look behind you can't see the fog. Preposterous. Lots and lots of intelligent people knew exactly what a danger this was. A danger of starting a nuclear war, by the way. And it's no matter how charming that man's accent is, don't let him confuse you into thinking that none of this was possibly a concern to any intelligent people along the way, that we could have possibly taken an off ramp here. Lots of people saw what was coming.
Yeah, I'm glad we are ending with that. I don't mean because I'm glad this is over. I'm saying that's a great clip to be the conclusion, the grand finale, because you're right. That just showcased Dave at his finest. Douglas Murray, I am quite confident, did not think this stand-up comedian who goes around spreading neo-Nazi tropes is going to sit there and tell him, George Kennan said, the author of Containment, and he said that, like to know the specific positions and nuances among the defense intelligentsia in the late 90s about what to do with the fall. So there's no way he thought Dave was going to start spitting it. And also, did you catch Dave when, as you well know, like Dave was it wasn't just that he was reciting a bunch of facts. Like he was like just alphaing him there. That was really impressive.
There's another impressive thing he did. We didn't get to play it, but 2 or 3 times Dave would specifically reference the similarities to whatever they were talking about, to the Iraq war, and just throwing it, that steaming turd right in Douglas Murray's lap, because he famously supported that stupid thing all through the disaster. And it was a magnificent performance. I can't imagine any of the people who've suffered through 1 minute and 46 seconds of this show didn't see it already. But just in case you didn't, Joe Rogan Experience, Dave Smith, Douglas Murray, check it out.
Yes.
Anything else you want to tell these people? An apology, perhaps?
No, I mean, I'm glad we did this, and I think that, again, I revised what I said after this discussion. I think now I'm comfortable just saying Dave won that debate, and I can't believe what a stick Douglas Murray was in that.
Yep, completely agree. Check out the Bob Murphy Show. If I got that wrong, bobmurphyshow.com. Yep. In case you're listening on Haman Nature, and if it's the other way around, check out hamannature.com, Haman, and also Haman Nature on YouTube. Thank you so much, loyal viewers and listeners. We'll catch you next time.
See you, everybody.